It's time again for another installment of The Basics, and on today's show, in sticking with the Star Trek CCG, I want to talk about draw deck percentages, more specifically the 60-40 rule. So let's get this started, shall we? Now, because there are so many players of the Star Trek CCG over the years from the beginning till now, there are a lot of different ways of thinking and constructing a deck. But one thing that a lot of players that I've encountered over the years and myself both agree on is what's called the 60-40 rule. And that is 60% total personnel to 40% everything else in your draw deck. Remember, we're not talking about the seed deck here. That being said, I'm using my Ferengi deck to illustrate the 60-40 rule, and my main affiliation in the deck is Ferengi, but I do utilize a number of non-aligned personnel to help the deck flow. Total is 60%, maybe 61%, just because of the extra non-aligned personnel. You can play with that number, you can push personnel up to 65%. I know it's important to have a lot of personnel to get out onto your ships and to complete missions, but at the same time, the higher quotient for personnel, the less room you have for other important cards in the draw deck that you need to play the game. Those include ships. As I've mentioned on previous shows, 3 to 4 ships is enough in a draw deck. There's a reason why you have a Q's tent side deck. You can hide a couple more ships in there, or an extra ship and a shuttlecraft, depending on the deck affiliation and what you're doing. Equipment cards, this will vary depending on the affiliation. I have several decks that use between 6 and 7 equipment cards. I have one deck that uses only 2, and I have another deck I think that uses 10, but I'm paring that down because I'm trying to make the deck flow better and not have too many equipment cards cluttering up my 40%. And most importantly, interrupts and events. These are the backbone of your 40% part of your draw deck. These are the cards you're going to be playing in an effort to move yourself along and to hinder your opponent. And again, if you have too many personnel in a deck, you're going to be limiting the amount of these cards you need to use. This also comes into play if you are using doorway cards that you don't necessarily have in your seed deck, but you're playing from your hand. It'll take away from slots assigned to those cards as well. Side decks aren't really mentioned here because that more falls under the seed phase, and as I've said, some of the cards that you might lack in your draw deck you can make up for in your Q's tent side deck. It's actually quite simple for that, but for all intents and purposes, the 60-40 rule is the way to go. Now, that being said, I've heard of people using as high as 80% personnel in their draw deck, and that is too excessive. You've pretty much pared your power cards and everything else down to 20%. There's not enough room to fit everything you need, especially if you need multiple copies of certain cards. Also, the lowest I would go would be 50%, so that would be like a 50-50 split for the draw deck. It's going to become harder to get personnel out and complete missions if you're only using 50% or less. So keep that in mind when you're building your next deck. Have a great day, everybody.